Today on an all-new Dr. Phil exclusive.
Collier was 11 when he heard his mom being murdered by his own father.
Police say she was struck on the head and suffocated with a plastic bag.
A child's testimony.
I heard a thud.
A hidden body.
My father rented the jackhammer days before the murder happened. It was completely premeditated.
A pregnant mistress.
Sherry showed up at his house right after his mother went missing.
A search for answers.
I was determined to find out what happened to my mother and put my father in prison for life.
Will he get out of prison alive? Will you be okay if he is granted parole?
I did not kill Noreen.
This is a psychopath. Let's do it.
Have a good show, everybody. Here we go.
This is a safe place to talk about hard things.
Stand by. We'll count you down.
Today's going to be a changing day in your life.
5, 4.
I am not giving up on you. On New Year's Eve, 1989, 11-year-old Collier Landry kissed his mother goodnight and went to bed. He had no idea it was the last time he would ever see her alive. Collier says he woke up about 3 a.m. and heard screams and loud thumps in the night. When he went looking for his mother in the morning, she was gone. He says his father told him Mommy went on a little vacation, but Collier knew his mother hadn't gone on any vacation. He soon realized that what he heard that night were actually the sounds of his mother being murdered by his father. What unfolded next was the trial of the decade. A pregnant mistress, a hidden body buried under the floorboards of a secret home, and a little boy who became the star witness in the murder case against his own father, Dr. John Boyle. More than 2 decades after his testimony helped convict his father of murder, Collier Landry decided to go back home. He wanted to face his past and face his father behind bars. He went back to get answers that he had waited for his entire life. The result was a documentary called A Murder in Mansfield. Take a look.
It is a case that residents in Mansfield and Central Ohio won't soon forget.
It was a story that consumed a town.
It was a kind of a frenzy. People wanted to know about this. It was like they had to know about it.
Noreen Boyle's car is still in the driveway, not moved since a cold December 31st, when police say here in the Boyle home, she was struck on the head and suffocated with a plastic bag. Dr. John Boyle was charged with murdering his wife, a murder their 11-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter may have heard.
I heard a scream coming from my sister. I heard a thud.
Noreen Boyle's body was found buried under fresh cement and new carpet beneath the basement floor.
I absolutely believe Dr. Boyle committed the crime when we found the body under the basement floor.
The two had been high school sweethearts and had been living a sweet life to outsiders. Suddenly, Boyle closed up shop, moved in with his younger pregnant girlfriend, and his wife disappeared.
The Boyle case is not only real, it's real close to home for many of the viewers. Courthouse employees managed their lunch breaks to stay right up to the minute on the story that's sweeping through every county office.
Boyle's son testified in that trial that he'd heard his mother and father fighting and that his father told him his mom had taken a vacation.
And one of the prosecution's key witnesses, the Boyle's son Collier. Just 12 years old at the time of the trial, the little boy testified about hearing his mother scream the night she was murdered.
I was just looking through her bedclothes lying there to see if there's any blood on there or if there's any blood on her bed or anything. And then my father came up and my eyes were filled with tears.
The more I investigated the case, the more empathy I felt for Collier. He was just lost. And he was a very intelligent young man and was very helpful to the case. I did not kill Noreen. I never harmed her at all.
A jury found Boyle guilty of murder.
We, the jury in this case, find the defendant, John F. Boyle, Jr., guilty of the offense as charged.
He was convicted of suffocating his wife, wrapping her body in a tarp, and entombing it under the newly carpeted basement floor of his Erie, Pennsylvania mansion.
The doctor was sentenced to life in prison.
While the headlines may focus on a sensational murder trial on Hawthorne Lane, the tragedy is simple and direct. Noreen Boyle is dead.
Well, Collier, this must all be surreal to go relive all of this and go back through it. What was the hardest thing about revisiting this time in your life?
Well, I feel, to be honest with you, I wanted to do this documentary. And I wanted to go back and get the answers that I wanted from my father. And so
how would your mother feel about this?
I think my mother would be really proud of what I did, because for me, I never wanted her to have a legacy that was in vain. I wasn't going to let that be the final chapter.
When you did this, you filmed a lot of first here. And I want to take a look at how this unfolded, because the courage, and I don't want to embarrass you here, but the courage you showed, it's hard for people to put themselves in the shoes of a child having to stand up against a father figure and actually speak out and give a voice to that. And what captivated people most about Dr. John Boyle's murder trial was the chilling testimony from a little boy who stared down his father in court and helped put him behind bars for life. So let's take a look at 12-year-old Collier on the stand.
You said you went to bed about 9 o'clock on December 30th.
Mm-hmm.
Did anything happen during the course of that night that woke you up?
I awoke at around 3 to 3:15 a.m.
You know, how do you know it was that time?
Because as I awoke, I looked at the clock, and it said it was between 3 and 3:15 a.m.
Okay, now, you woke at that time. Is there any reason why you woke up rather than just stay there and sleep?
Because I heard a scream coming from my sister. The immediate thought I had was something was wrong with my mother. About a little while later, maybe about 3 minutes, maybe, I heard a thud. A little.
Okay, could you describe this sound for us?
Okay, it was about this loud. And then about a minute and a half later, I heard, half a minute later, I heard a thud like this, even louder. And at that time, I was petrified. I was just scared.
All right, now, did you get up at that time to investigate what had happened?
No, I did not.
And could you tell the jury why you didn't?
Because I was extremely afraid of my father, and I always have.
Okay, now, did there come a time that you got up next morning and looked for your mother?
Yes, it was around 8:30 in the morning, and I got up and I ran immediately to my mother's room, and I noticed the covers were pulled back like a body had been taken out. It's not the normal way my mother would get out of bed. And so I went downstairs and I said, "Where's my mother?" to my father, and he said, "Well, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier." And then I didn't know what to say. I just panicked. And so I said, and he said, "She'll be back in a few days," and then she just left.
When was the last time you spoke with your mother?
It was around the night of December 30th.
Well, right before you went to bed?
Yes.
And that was the last time you really saw your mother, is that correct?
Yes.
By the way, you'll be able to see a lot more of this documentary airing on Investigation Discovery on November 17th at 9 p.m. And let me tell you, it is so well done and is really compelling. What's it like to watch yourself on the stand?
I had never, ever seen the trial footage, ever. I had never seen this trial footage. And I was looking at myself going, who's this kid?
Your father's in the room while this is happening. Is he looking at you? Are you looking at him when this is going on?
I literally stared him down the whole time. And he would not look at me. He would sometimes look up, but every time I looked, he looked down. And at that moment, there was a lot of satisfaction. As horrific as it is to testify at a trial of your mother's murder, it's even worse that it had to be your father who you're testifying against.
Right.
But for me, I knew what I was doing was the right thing to do, so I was angry. I was angry, I was hurt, I was confused, but I knew the truth. And the satisfaction that I got from going up there and testifying against him was, I can't tell you how gratifying that was, despite the tragedy and the tragic circumstances that I was going through.
Right. Well, on the outside, Collier's family looked picture perfect. But what was happening behind closed doors that led to murder? And later, Collier confronts his dad behind bars more than 2 decades after the crime. Will he finally admit the truth? We'll be right back.
She was afraid for her life because she told me that about a month and a half before that. Said, you know, if I ever disappeared, Daddy probably killed me.
And later, Dr. John Boyle was sentenced to life in prison. This is a psychopath. Did your father ever ask you not to testify?
Tomorrow, she says her husband's image is being used as catfish bait.
50 women have been conned.
The catfish knew details about our family.
They would have pictures from the inside of our home.
Could this man hold the answers?
You're not the male voice on the phone calls, right?
No. Get ready.
I think you've been getting played.
For an unexpected twist.
The catfish is here.
That's tomorrow. Then on Monday, a bitter custody battle.
The therapist recommended all parties stop videotaping.
You know that therapist was terminated.
The therapist didn't make those recordings, you did.
New Dr. Phil, Monday.
Can you tell us what you did with your mom?
Usually we like to go shopping together and just go out. We watch a lot of movies, and we go to the grocery store together and rent movies and stuff like that. But we just have a lot of fun. We go all kinds of different places.
Okay, now also drawing your attention here to your father, Dr. John Boyle. Did he spend time with you?
Not very much at all.
But compared to the time you spent with your mom, would you say you spent maybe how much % with your dad and how much % with your mother?
99% with my mother and 1% with my father.
Well, Collier Landry was just 11 years old when his father murdered his mother as Collier lay in bed listening. Now, Collier says everyone thought they were the picture-perfect family. His father, a prominent doctor, his wife, the perfect mother. But behind closed doors, Collier says it was a very different story. There was tension between your father and mother. What was going on between the two of them?
My father was very verbally and sometimes very physically abusive to both myself and my mother.
Right.
And one of the things we talk about is, in the film, is he threw my dog across the living room into the wall one time. He had a very violent temper that would just come on like that out of nowhere.
Right.
And to other people, it seemed like, oh, they have a picture-perfect life. But that just wasn't the case.
Now, he had a mistress, as we find out. You had actually met her.
Yeah.
How did that come to pass?
So it was around Memorial Day weekend of 1989, and my father took me to a barbecue, like a party, that was at her parents' house. And my father told me, oh, this is a patient of mine. They were walking around this lake that was there, and I saw my father put his arm around her from a distance, and I thought, something's not quite right. And then we left, and he gave her a kiss on the cheek. It wasn't until Father's Day, a month later, that I went with him to this place called the Suntan Factory. He was getting a suntan. She showed up with 2 remote control cars, and for my father and I as gifts. She had a ring on that was my mother's. And then I saw him, at the time, I think I told my mother, he tongue kissed her. but I saw him kiss her in a way that's not a friend or a patient,
right.
You know. And my father then asked me to lie about it. And I did that night when we went out for Father's Day. I lied to my mother. And I got so violently ill that night, and I woke up the next morning, I was playing with that remote control car, and I just stopped. I walked in, my mother was sitting on her porch, and I walked in and I said, Mommy, I lied to you, I'm sorry, but I think Daddy is having an affair. And my mother knew that.
Collier knew for sure something was off when Sherry showed up. Take a look.
Did there come a time that you were with your father and he happened to see Sherry Campbell?
Yes.
Did you tell the jury when that happened?
It was a Father's Day of last year. And my father asked me if I wanted to go with him to take a suntan to the suntan factory or wherever it was. And when we got there, my dad got out and he says, well, look who's here. It's Sherry. And Then I just was like disgusted. Then I turned to Sherry and I looked at her hand and she had a ring on. And I turned to her and I said, Sherry, my mother has a ring like that.
Did this affect you in any way?
Yes, it did, very emotionally.
Can you tell the jury how it affected you emotionally?
Well, I was so close to my mother, I couldn't believe my father could do anything like that. I thought it was her ring, my mother's ring, because I knew that was a very special ring. I knew hardly anybody ever had a ring like that, so.
When you're testifying against your father, your mother is gone, you're now a linchpin in putting your father in the penitentiary, so you know I'm going to walk out of here with no parent.
The really sort of challenging thing with that is the prosecution, literally, and Dave Messmore, they said, we don't need you. You don't need to testify. And I was like, there's absolutely no way you're talking me out of testifying, because I know what happened. And this, I was very, very adamant about, this guy's not going to get away with this.
You say the night after your mom goes missing, Sherry, your dad's mistress, came over with a pork roast she had made.
She did.
And you said it was just like Insta-family, like all of a sudden, mother's gone, she's there, big happy family, big dinner. Did your dad think that was, I mean, what did he say to y'all about why is she here?
Well, no, she came to, to give us dinner, and look what wonderful things she did. And I was not having it. I'm like, I don't want this woman, I don't want to be around this woman. I know this woman, because to me, she's responsible for breaking up my parents' marriage, because I didn't know my father was having affairs for years. Already, I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get in touch with police? Because my mother would never walk out on me. She's not missing. I know what I heard. I know she's not coming back. Finally, when the police started taking it seriously, when they were treating it as a missing persons case initially, when the uniformed officers came to the house to kind of see what's going on, I pulled one of them away and upstairs, and I said, look, my mother would never leave. She is either dead or he's done something to her. She was afraid for her life, because she told me that about a month and a half before that. Said, if I ever disappeared, Daddy probably killed me.
Well, coming up, inside the secret home Collier's father purchased, did he buy a house planning to bury a body? We'll talk about that next.
These are, you sure you want to see these with your pictures of your mom?
Wednesday on an all-new Dr. Phil.
My mom has always been a hoarder.
Oh, God. I'm stepping in animal feces.
As a child, there were times when you didn't even have a clean place to sleep.
Yeah. That's her perspective.
There aren't versions of the truth. There's either a sanitary room or there's not.
That's Wednesday.
I was the lead detective on the Dr. John Boyle case. It was about 3 weeks until we found Noreen. Dr. Boyle purchased a house in Erie. The doctor had asked the real estate agent if she knew what was under the basement floor, because he was thinking about lowering that so his son could play basketball down there, which is extremely bizarre. I obtained a search warrant for his house. We opened the door in the basement. One of the technicians found what he thought was fresh concrete on the wall. So we took sledgehammers and we started to excavate that. It took about 2 hours. And then we could see the tarp. As we pulled that out, then we found Noreen's body. She still had her Rolex watch on and necklace.
Well, that was lead investigator Dave Messmore. Now, he and his wife actually wanted to adopt Collier Landry, and they remain close to this day. Now, Collier was just 11 when he heard his mom being murdered by his own father. Now, for years, the only details he knew was what he heard that night. But decades later, his father figure, the lead investigator, showed Collier what actually happened to his mother that night. Take a look.
When I eventually got a search warrant prepared, we found a jackhammer and some indoor-outdoor carpet had been purchased by your father several days before the actual murder. And then we went into the basement, and he had put large shelving up And it took some time before we actually found some disturbance of the concrete.
Sure weird. Well, that's definitely got a motor.
Yes. Okay. It's a green tarp?
Yep.
It took probably 3 hours to excavate that.
And that's when you knew it was my mom?
Right. She had a plastic bag tied around her neck, and that was to ensure that there was definitely going to be a death. And also, she had been subjected to blows to the back of the head with what may be a hammer, and that had cracked the skull, and it was done at least twice.
I never knew this. I mean, I literally never knew this until you tell me this right now. So it was very intentional.
There wasn't any question about that. Yeah. These are. You sure you want to see these with your pictures of your mom? This is the next day, and that's why the body has started to deteriorate so much. I know.
So was that the first time you found out exactly what happened?
My entire life, you know, I would have nightmares, and I had this sort of vision in my head of what my mother's body would have looked like, or her face and all this. It haunted me. So when we were filming, we were at the Massmore's house, and my director, Barbara Koppel, they were gonna go to the police station, look at the case file, and she looked at me and she said, "Collier, would you like to come?" And the purpose of this film is to show vulnerability and to show that when you go through trauma, you can get through it. And I said, I'm going, I want to see those photos. Some people say that was really courageous of you. I just say, it's something I had to do. Because it's about closing those doors, closing those chapters and moving through the trauma.
You said the day that they actually did the excavation and actually did the dig and recovered her, you were in foster care.
It was my first night in foster care. They had literally yanked me out at about 7 o'clock in the morning that day. Pack a bag, didn't get to say goodbye to didn't get any toys, didn't get anything, just throw some clothes in a bag. There's police and scanners and crime scene, crime lab outside, a lot of things. And, you know, that was the last time I saw my dog. And I just yanked. And I had asthma, really bad asthma at that time in my life. And that night when I was in foster care, I had no idea what was happening. I had probably the worst asthma attack of my life, where I was literally just sitting there and I thought, I'm gonna die. I may just die. And the next morning I went to the hospital. I was ushered past with the honor, remember they used to have newspapers and honor boxes? Ushered past the honor box, which had the headlines, into the room. They gave me a breathing treatment. I was better. And then that is when they told me that Lieutenant Massmore found your mother, beat, 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 and she was dead.
And you had that asthma attack at the time they were finding your mother?
Yeah.
Well, after his mother vanished, Collier's father insisted he had nothing to do with her death. Next, what he claimed happened to his wife.
Did you, on or about December 31st of 1989, cause the death of Noreen Boyle?
No, I did not. I did not kill Noreen. I never harmed her at all.
I believe Elizabeth was a witness. A little girl who was recently adopted from Taiwan slept with Noreen most of the time. She's only about 2.5 or 3 years old, so she couldn't testify in the trial. She did explain to me how, when she was in bed, Guga's daddy, who would have been her brother's daddy in Taiwanese, came into the room and hit Mommy with something. She didn't know what. Then he took her out of bed and laid her on a sheet and rolled her up like a snowman. That was her description to me, and then took her out of the room. She demonstrated that to me in the home where she was staying.
Well, Collier Landry was just 12 years old when he became the star witness in the murder trial of his father, Dr. John Boyle. Now, his documentary with Oscar-winning filmmaker Barbara Koppel, A Murder in Mansfield, airs on Investigation Discovery on November 17th at 9 p.m. Prosecutors claim Dr. John Boyle murdered his wife and buried her in the basement of a secret house he purchased. But Collier's father testified that he was completely innocent.
For the record, for the benefit of the jurors, would you state your full name, please?
John Francis Boyle, Jr.
Did you have occasion to see, talk to Noreen early morning of December 31st of 1989?
Yes, I was on the sofa in the family room, and Noreen came down and woke me up. She started hollering, Jack, 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 and threw credit cards at me.
Right. Did she leave the house then?
Mm-hmm. Yes, she did. So I walked down the driveway. I ran back to the table that sits there in the family room, put my glasses on, and ran back again to see where she was gone.
What did you see?
By the time I got there, I saw Noreen get into a car at the edge of the driveway.
Left in that car?
Left in that car.
Did you, on or about December 31st of 1989, cause the death of Noreen Boyle?
No, I did not. I did not kill Noreen. I never harmed her at all. I did not hire anyone or ask or counsel or incite or anything else like that to take the life of Noreen Boyle.
Did your father ever talk to you about testifying, ask you not to testify, discuss with you your role in trial at all before you testified?
No, I only saw my father one time before the trial, and he was, oh, I love you, I do this and that. I don't even think I said 2 words to him. I was so angry with him. It wasn't until after I had testified that my father went on a crusade for many years to try to get me to rescind my testimony or say that I was lying, or they sent investigators to what became my adopted home to interview me about being coached by the prosecution. And, oh, they put things in your head. And I'm going, no, they didn't, because I told the truth.
You were the one that actually tipped them to the second house where your mother's body was found. How did you know about that house?
So I had seen a photograph in my father's little cubbyhole in the truck, one of a house, and one of Sherry's family, of her kids, because she had kids from a previous marriage, sitting in front of the fireplace. And it was like there was plastic on the fireplace, so it struck me as being there was something new, but I'd never seen this house before, and I had told Dave Messmore about this house. I said, I don't know where it is, but I found these photos.
And we now know that he, in fact, did have a second house, and we now know that he went and rented a jackhammer.
Yeah.
I mean, is that not just incredibly arrogant? I mean, how you go rent a jackhammer and take it down and jack up the floor and...
Well, Dr. Phil, if you've not had the pleasure of meeting my father, but my father is probably one of the most arrogant people on the planet. So he can, he's a complete, total narcissist.
But it would seem like the blind man could follow that trail.
Exactly. And, he, over the years, the story changes, and it was an accident, it was this, but it's, Dad, you rented the jackhammer 3 or 4 days before the murder happened.
Right.
You bought the AstroTurf a couple weeks before, because there's the receipts from the Kmart that they used in the trial, or the green tarp that you wrapped her up in, right? Yeah. So it was completely premeditated.
Coming up, Collier confronts his father behind bars. He was looking for answers. Did he get them? We'll be right back.
So what happened? She picked up a knife, and she came at me with that knife, and so I pushed her. I pushed her, and she hit her head against that wooden table. That's what happened. I'm telling you, that's what happened.
Good evening, everyone. This was the moment of truth in Mansfield today.
We, the jury in this case, find the defendant, John F. Boyle, Jr., guilty of the offense as charged in the indictment.
The judge said he would tolerate no outbursts in the courtroom, but they cheered in the hallway when Dr. John Boyle was found guilty of killing his wife, Noreen.
Dr. John Boyle was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife, Noreen. All Collier has ever wanted from his father was for him to admit the truth about what he did to his mother. So he went to the prison to get answers.
So what happened?
Well, I told you I was where I slept all the time. You knew where I slept.
Yes.
Downstairs on the sofa in the family room. I came home. I don't know, I'm thinking it's around 10 o'clock. You guys all went to bed afterwards. I went to sleep sometime, and Mommy came down there and woke me up and started hollering about different things. She was talking about Mansfield, she was talking about money, she was talking about Sherry, she was talking about basically everything under the sun. My intentions were not to kill her or do anything else to her. But then she picked up a knife, and she came at me with that knife, and so I pushed her. I pushed her, and she hit her head against that wooden table. That's what happened. I'm telling you, that's what happened.
Then what else happened?
I ran upstairs to grab some underwear and my clothes and everything, put it in a bag because I was getting out of the house. And I came downstairs to see what she was doing, and she was there on the floor. She hadn't moved after I pushed her. Tried CPR on her. Didn't work. She was lifeless. She was dead. I panicked. I didn't know what to do.
How did she get a plastic bag over her head?
I put the plastic bag over her head. I put it over her head because I was just afraid to look at her, scared to look at her.
Not to suffocate her?
Not to suffocate her, no, not at all.
I don't believe you.
9 p.m., November 17th, investigation discovery. You can see the entire exchange between those two. You do not want to miss that. Now, I'm watching him while you're doing this because I've devoted a lot of my professional training to deception detection. And this is a psychopath. I mean, he's answering this in a way that he has convinced himself, he's believing it while he's saying it. Did you get the sense that he expected you to buy this?
Oh, for sure. When he comes in the room, he's very excited to be there, camera, because he felt that I was going to make a film that was going to help him get his parole and get out of prison. That's literally what he believed. I confront him with a statement before I read him this letter, and I say, since you murdered my mother, and that is the first time in my life that I say that to him, because I had visited him in prison for years because I wanted to keep a relationship. And look, let me be honest, it's hard enough to lose one parent. I didn't want to lose both, even though he's a horrific human being. I do. But there's a little part of you that doesn't want it to be true. So I say that statement to him, and it's like all the air gets sucked out of the room. And that is the first time in my life where I literally said, since testifying, I am taking back the power.
Yeah. Well, coming up, what became of Collier's sister, Elizabeth? We're going to find out what happened when Collier tried to call her after all of these years. And I have a couple other questions about that interaction. We'll be right back.
My name is Collier Landry. I grew up in this house. Oh, okay. I just wanted to see if we could come in for like maybe 5 minutes. This was my mother's bedroom, where she took her last breath.
Well, after more than 2 decades, Collier Landry decided to go back to the home where his father murdered his mother. He filmed it for the documentary, A Murder in Mansfield.
616 Hawthorne Lane. This looks the same. Like, I remember all these shelves. I remember my parents had these put in. The fireplace. I mean, all this. The dining room. The dining room was a little smaller because I was a little small right at the time.
No, look around, bro.
But
Make yourself
so
at home,
crazy. So back here, this used to be my mother's office. And I used to have a desk right here where my computer was and computer games and all this stuff. And her desk was right over here, overlooking the outside. We had this pine tree out the window. This right here was my bedroom. I described in the trial, I was laying in bed and I was laying like this. And that's when I heard my father's footsteps come and the door was open. And I kept remembering, and I remember my clock, my Batman clock was right here on the wall, and it said 3:18. When I woke up and I looked at the clock, and I heard his footsteps, and he stopped right by the door, and I kept saying, this voice in my head just kept saying, don't look up, don't look up, don't look up, don't look up, don't look up. Because I really firmly believe that if I had looked up at that moment, that I would not be here right now. That I would have been murdered right along with my mother. And yeah, right here. I haven't been in this room in 26 years. This was my mother's bedroom, where she took her last breath. It's almost like I feel her presence a little bit right now. Not to sound heavy-duty about things, but...
How did it feel to walk that space where you knew it took place?
I hadn't been in that house in 26 years. And yeah, there was definitely a presence there. And it was challenging.
And did they know what had happened there?
Yeah, they did.
Now, we talked about your sister, and you haven't spoken to her ever again, right?
I haven't seen when she was adopted. She was adopted by her foster parents, and they were not exactly, we didn't see eye to eye. Let's put it that way, put it mildly. So they did not allow me to have any contact with her whatsoever. We had a couple of visits, and they, through Children's Services, and they made them supervised visits, and they said, she's so tortured by seeing him, it's traumatizing her, you know, which I think was a bunch of nonsense. Yeah, I have not seen her in, well, that was 1990, so what are we, 28 years now? And I tried to reach out to her during the film. We, did the call search, found some numbers, called, nothing, silence on the other end of the phone, then click. A lot of that, left some voicemails, which you see in the film, but nothing.
And you believe that she actually witnessed the murder?
I don't see how she couldn't. Every single night, she would go to bed in her room, which was right next to my mother's room, and she would end up in the bed with my mother the next morning. And when I woke up that morning of December 31st, 1989, after having heard the thumps, went back to sleep finally, woke up, it was about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, went in there, she was in the bed.
Well, we know how Collier felt going into this. We know why he did it. How does he feel coming out the other end? We'll talk about that after the break. For you, how do you feel coming out the other end of this process?
Well, Dr. Phil, this is the greatest achievement of my life. Started on the morning of December 31st, 1989, when I was determined to find out what happened to my mother and put my father in prison for life, that I was on that journey, and that is ultimately what started the domino effect for me to lead myself through the trauma and ultimately heal myself.
Do you have unfinished emotional business with your father?
No.
So you need nothing from him?
No. I walked out of that room, and that was it.
Will he get out of prison alive? He's been up for parole. It was denied.
And he's up for parole again in 2020, and I will not be there to support that.
Okay. Will you be okay if he is granted parole?
We let the chips fall where they may, I suppose, but I don't see that happening.
Do you have any need to see him again?
No. When I walk out of that room for my father, you know that I'm never coming back to see him.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. Collier, this has just been great. Thank you for sharing this with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phil.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Collier made his documentary with Oscar-winning filmmaker Barbara Koppel. It's called A Murder in Mansfield, and it is fantastic, and it is premiering on November 17th at 9 p.m. on Investigation Discovery. I highly recommend you seek that out. Take the phone off the hook, sit down, pay close attention. It is more than just something to fill some time. It really has a message. It really has some information that I think will impact your life. For more information, go to drphil.com. Thanks for watching.